G'day guys, ZiggyD here. I wanted to give you guys some pre-release analysis of the upcoming skill Scorching Ray that'll be releasing later this week. I think it's a pretty interesting skill. My first impressions of it when they first released the video was that it looked pretty boring. I thought I'd play it just, because it's a laser, pew pew. But the skill mechanically is seeming more and more interesting the more I've kind of dug into my analysis of it. So I've studied the video, I've studied the information ZiggyD has released, and I've also spoken extensively to Rory. And the purpose of this video is going to be to get you guys the information you need to be able to put together a Scorching Ray build. I do have some example builds you can take a look at, and I'll give you guys some analysis of some Ascendancies that I think are really good. But this is mostly going to be focused on the skill and analysis of it. So Scorching Ray is a beam of fire. It is not an AoE and it is not a projectile. So that doesn't mean you can increase the width or the length of it in any way. You can't scale it up with area of effect or even area damage. And you also can't do things like multiple projectiles or anything like that with it. So because Scorching Ray's beam is a set length and width and you can't scale that up, how do you actually scale its AoE? Well, cast speed is the key. The way this skill works mechanically is that it has a set turning speed. So while you're channeling it, you can only turn it at a set speed. You are limited in how fast you can rotate your character while channeling this skill. Besides just improving your AoE clear speed, cast speed is quite good for this skill in terms of damage as well, because it increases the speed at which you ramp up the damage effect of the skill. The way the damage works in Scorching Ray is actually quite interesting. While enemies are in it, they are burning. Now that's a bit like Righteous Fire or Fire Trap's Burning Ground. It's not an ignite, you don't actually ever hit the enemy. So as a side note, that means you can't do things like crit or any other on-hit effects like Culling Strike. So I spoke with Rory about this damage stacking mechanic, and essentially what happens is, while an enemy is in the beam, they get this accruing stacks of increasing amount of damage they'll be taking from the beam, as well as a debuff to their fire resistance. Now there's a maximum of 8 stacks, and each stack reduces their fire resistance by 3% for a maximum of -24 fire resistance at the maximum of 8 stacks. So scaling your cast speed is not only going to be able to speed up how fast you can kind of like aim with this skill, but also how fast you'll reach that 8 stacks as well, how fast you'll reach your maximum damage with this beam. So in terms of scaling the raw damage of Scorching Ray, elemental damage, fire damage, damage over time, burning damage, and actually spell damage as well will all scale the raw damage of this skill. Normally spell damage doesn't work for degens, but this skill is tagged with an exception to that rule, much like Essence Drain is. Now the fact that spell damage works with the Scorching Ray means that Righteous Fire is going to be really good with it as well. Righteous Fire gives a massive more spell damage multiplier while it's active, and that will be scaling Scorching Ray, in addition to the fact that Righteous Fire itself also scales somewhat similarly to Scorching Ray, being a fire burning damage skill. So you can essentially have a character that runs Righteous Fire, benefits from the spell damage through Scorching Ray, and then also benefits from any fire, elemental, and burning damage you're getting in the Righteous Fire as well. So you can clear enemies that are surrounding you with Righteous Fire, stand on top of an enemy to get Righteous Fire's damage, and Scorching Ray's damage. The next mechanic I want to talk about is duration, because this skill will be tagged with the duration tag, and you can, in some fashion, scale it with duration. Now it's not as good as, say, something like duration on Blade Vortex, where it'll increase the length that a stack lingers for, allowing you to stack up your Blade Vortex stacks to a higher amount. It's not as good as that, essentially. The way duration actually works in this is that it increases the duration in which the fire burning effect and the fire resistance debuff lingers on the enemy when you stop casting Scorching Ray on them. For a little moment after the beam moves over the top of the enemy and is no longer targeting them, they will continue to burn and they'll continue to have this fire resistance debuff. So the practical example of this is, say, in a boss fight where you're beaming a boss, you're at 8 stacks, you're dealing lots of damage to them, you're having a good time, and then they go to one-shot you, they do a big slam skill, so you have to dodge out of the way. Now in that time, you're not able to keep channeling Scorching Ray on them while you're moving, and you need to get to a new location and start channeling again. In that time, you could lose your stacks on that boss and have to start channeling on them again and start building up your damage again, ramping up your damage to that maximum. Now, if you have enough duration and you move quickly enough, then you could be able to reposition, continue channeling Scorching Beam again, reacquire the target, and still be at max stacks. So duration will have that impact. It's kind of like a quality of life and almost a survival/defensive bonus as well. Now, what this does mean is that Rapid Decay is going to be very good for this skill because it has a duration tag and it gives you more damage over time. Rapid Decay is going to be fantastic, and the slight loss of duration is probably not something you're going to notice too much. It also means that potentially the less duration support gem, if you don't have another gem that you want to use, could also be used. It gives you a more damage multiplier, and it does significantly reduce your duration, but it means that your damage while you're actually channeling on enemies is going to be better. It also means that getting duration on the tree is not what I would call a high priority with this skill. Getting one duration cluster if you're going past it or going near it for something like Elemental Equilibrium, which I think is going to be very good with this skill, is probably worth it. Spending the 3 points or potentially 4 points might be worth it, but I wouldn't really go out of your way to get both duration clusters, for example. Now, another thing I wanted to note was totems with this skill. I think Totem Scorching Ray is going to be good for a few different purposes. Firstly, I think as a support skill, Scorching Ray is actually going to be fantastic. If you're playing something like a Flame Blaster or some other burning or igniting or fire damage based character, then you could have a Scorching Ray totem essentially just to lower enemies' resistances. So that's going to boost your, quite frankly, already massive fire damage from most fire skills even further. So Scorching Ray totems could well become a support skill for fire builds, and not just a main skill. Now, in terms of Scorching Ray totems as your actual main skill, as in your clearing skill, this idea of having windscreen wiper totems that kind of like fan themselves across enemies, I think it could work okay. I think the AI on totems might be somewhat problematic at times because you aren't going to be able to control where the beams go, and for such a narrow AoE, having no control over that could be somewhat problematic, but dropping 2 or 3 totems, chances are they're going to beam down most enemies pretty well most of the time. Now, the drawback of this is that I strongly believe that with the mechanics that we've discussed here, that having multiple Scorching Ray totems targeting a single enemy won't really give you a boost in damage. It's a bit like having 2 Searing Bond stacks on top of an enemy. There was a time where these things stacked, but these days that's not the case. 2 burns from the same source don't stack up, essentially. If you're playing a totem character using Scorching Ray against a boss, then you might be in a position where you just drop 1 Scorching Ray totem, and then drop a Searing Bond totem, and then drop another fire totem, or another totem of some form. In fact, I've been working on a wacky Scorching Ray, Searing Bond, Blight totem build, because they all kind of scale pretty similarly. Okay, so next up, I've done some analysis on what Ascendancies I think work very well with Scorching Ray. There's a lot of, edgy sort of things that you can do besides these, but I think these are the 3 that really jump out to me as key Ascendancies, core Ascendancies that just have a lot of synergy with Scorching Ray. Now, these 3 are all very good, but I think the one that takes the cake is Inquisitor. I will mention that things like Necromancer, which is good for almost any build, is also going to be good for Scorching Ray. That could definitely make the list for sure. And things like Guardian for like low life Righteous Fire or something like that can be done as well. But these are 3 that I think are going to work really well right off the bat. So let's go take a look at these guys and I'll tell you what's good about them. Okay, so first up we have Inquisitor, the one that I think really stands out the most to me. This one came as a surprise because Inquisitor's a crit class, right? Well, it turns out only 1 line is crit, and some of this other stuff works really well. So when you're channeling a skill like Scorching Ray, you are stationary. And there's definitely some concerns about how do you survive in a game like Path of Exile without Leech when you have a stationary skill, so a stationary degen skill. And yeah, there's a pretty legitimate concerns, and I think those concerns are going to be what holds these skills back from becoming top tier skills. I think they're going to be good. I think Scorching Ray and I think Blight, I don't know much about the attack skill yet, but I think these 2 skills are going to be good, but I don't think they're going to be like top tier skills because of that drawback. But that said, we can kind of take advantage of that drawback here with Inquisitor, and that's why it really stands out for me. So first up, the side stuff we have is Augury of Penitence. I mean, nearby enemies take 16% increased elemental damage. If you do this with Righteous Fire, that's going to be even better. And then they deal less elemental damage. It's really good. You stand close to an enemy and you're able to deal more damage to them with Scorching Ray. So if you want to focus on damage, you can do so. Next up, Instruments of Virtue, 30% spell damage if you cast a spell recently, so that automatically happens as soon as you start channeling Scorching Ray. For the next 4 seconds, you'll have 30% damage, nice. And then 30% increased cast speed if you've attacked recently. So you simply use Shield Charge to Shield Charge to the next pack, which you're going to be doing all the time anyway, or Shield Charge to reposition in a boss fight, and you're going to get 30% cast speed. Cast speed, massive! As I said, cast speed I think is going to be very good for this skill, both in terms of your ability to swivel and target things, and also in terms of that ramp up of your damage, getting to that 8 stacks as quickly as possible. And 30% cast speed is massive. It's a massive amount, so that's really nice. So the ability to shield charge and then have a really big boost of cast speed is quite nice as well. And then there's the side benefit here of, the attack speed benefit if you've attacked recently, which makes you shield charge around faster, so you get better clear speed. And then we have the core of this, the part that kind of like jumps out as really good with Scorching Ray, and that is this consecrated ground line here, Piety and Sanctify. Now Sanctify gives you a damage bonus and some chances to create consecrated ground, not bad, but where it really shines is in Pious Path. Cannot be affected by elemental status ailments while in consecrated ground, a huge defensive bonus. And then 4% of mana and energy shield regenerated while on consecrated ground. Now consecrated ground also gives you 4% life regen, which if you're playing an ES build can be converted using Zealot's Oath or a Zealot's Oath Flask. And then you get 25% attack and cast speed while on consecrated ground, so another 25% cast speed. So we're talking 55% cast speed. If you shield charge, pop a flask to drop consecrated ground, you're getting 55% cast speed for the next 4 seconds. Very nice. And then you maintain that 25% as long as you keep consecrated ground up, which, as I'll get into, can be done 100% of the time quite easily. There's also like some extra cast speed over here as well, so you end up with another 4%. There's a lot of cast speed in this tree, which is one of the things that I think really pushes it ahead. So you're getting this really nice defensive bonuses, heaps of regen, and then this cast speed benefit while on consecrated ground works really nicely. Now here's the key to this, Sorrow of the Divine Sulphur Flask. This is a flask that drops consecrated ground on use. It gives you Zealot's Oath as well, so if you're playing an energy shield build, then you're able to get Zealot's Oath through this while you have consecrated ground up, which means you can potentially not go for the Zealot's Oath Keystone. This flask is very easy to keep up as well, because it has 5 to 6 second duration and consumes only 20 charges of 60 on you, so it's very easy to keep uptime on this all the time throughout boss fights. You can combine it with this chalice that helps this refill, or you can use Worm Flask or something like that. So you can keep this up all the time, and while clearing, you're going to be able to activate this whenever you stop to cast Scorching Ray, essentially. So it's going to work really nicely. So the next one is probably the more obvious one, which is Chieftain. There's a lot of fire stuff in here, so naturally Chieftain's going to work quite well. The base tree looks like this, Nahamu, which is 35% increased burning damage against burning enemies. It's nice. I can't really complain about that. There's elemental damage and regen in here. And then Ramako's Son gives you endurance charge generation as well as some extra regeneration as well. Naturally, this is going to be for a life-based Righteous Fire style Scorching Ray, which, as I mentioned, is quite good. Now you can also use something like a Searing Bond totem or a Decoy totem with this guy to cause enemies to take 16% increased fire damage, which is just similar effect to what you're able to get from the Inquisitor. And then for the final 2 points, you can either, if you're focusing on Scorching Ray totems, go into Tukohama here, or you can just get Tukohama if you want your totem, your Searing Bond or Decoy totem to be a bit tankier and do a little bit of bonus damage. Or if you're going Iron Will, and building Iron Will work with this since it does scale with spell damage, then you can go into Talhoa for that bonus strength increase there. So you got 2 options there for the last 2 points. And then the final one is of course Trickster. Patient Reaper, very good here, increased damage over time, massive boost to recovery rate, which affects your regen and energy shield recharge and mana regen and all that sort of thing whenever you kill an enemy with damage over time. So that's quite easy and quite strong, quite nice there. Ghost Dance and Shade Form, if you're in Trickster, you're taking these, they're just defensively super strong. So this can be done as hybrid, or it can be done as CI, and I guess you could do it as life-based, but I think it really shines when you do it with something like CI. Then for the last 2 points, you could get Swift Killer, but I actually think Walk the Aether is better here. Similar effect to what we're looking at in Inquisitor, a little bit weaker, but it makes your movement skills free, kind of just a side bonus in this. But you get the 20% increased cast speed if you've used a movement skill recently. So you can use whatever movement skill you want. You could use Lightning Warp or Flame Dash, or you can use Shield Charge still. And then you get that cast speed bonus, so that's quite nice as well. So the reason why I think Inquisitor comes out on top, these are all really good, is that Templar location is just great for this. It is probably the best of all of the start locations. We get 110% increased damage compared to something like 55% from Chieftain, and much less even from Trickster, so the actual just raw damage you're getting is really good. The amount of cast speed you get from this is phenomenal, very, very high, even higher than what you get from Trickster, which is not something you might have expected from a Templar. I know I didn't expect that when I thought Inquisitor. I actually dismissed Inquisitor when I first thought about it, but actually looking at it ends up being pretty nice. And then the flexibility to do life-based Righteous Fire with Inquisitor, or to be able to do CI and really benefit from a ton of regen. Now, as we mentioned, there's some defensive concerns with a standstill channel degen skill, but at least if you're getting 14%, I think I calculated, energy shield regeneration, then at least you're going to have a lot of energy shield regeneration to survive with. So I think that's going to end up being really nice, and that Consecrated Ground setup just works really nicely with that. The other side benefit here is that Inquisitor also does a lot to solve your mana problems too. 4% base mana regen. So normally mana regen is like 1 point something percent of your total mana, and then it gets scaled up by increased mana regen. Inquisitor adds 4% base while you're on top of Consecrated Ground, so you don't have to invest anything else into mana. That's going to solve your mana problems by itself. So you'll be able to channel your skill without worrying about mana, just while standing on Consecrated Ground. So another benefit there that's quite nice. So guys, hopefully you found this interesting and helpful. I think Scorching Ray is panning out to be quite a nice skill. I think it's going to see a fair bit of use as a support skill for fire builds, and I think it could be a pretty decent and fairly fun main skill as well. That's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.